Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk from Jerusalem, Israel. Rabbi and Richman here together with Yitzchak Reuven. Today is the fourth day of the month of Mar Cheshvan, 5778. It's October the 24th, 2017. And this week, parashat Lech Lecha, go for yourself, or go to yourself maybe, or go into yourself. The first Torah portion that begins to speak about the patriarch, Abraham, who actually we were introduced to briefly at the end of last week's Torah portion. And I got to tell you, Yitzchak, there's so much ink spilled, this is the way the expression is. There's so much attention given to the forefathers here in the book of Bereshit, Genesis. Of course, the whole book of Genesis is really the stories of those early years of creation. And there's so many details that are given to us about the forefathers and the lives that they led and their adventures. And why is that, do you think? It's a rhetorical question.
Yeah, let's hear the answer.
I mean, you don't have to answer, but I'd like you to.
Well, they are the foundation of who we are. The more we know about them, the more we know about ourselves. The more we understand their challenges, we understand our challenges. Lech Lecha is not just going into oneself, but it's also going into the land. It's the challenge of living here in the land of Israel, which is the very first commandment.
How beautifully put. How beautifully put. It's like everything that we need to know in life, we learn from these men and their relationship with God. And especially, we start to learn about Abraham now, and there's so much that we learn about him, his nature, his character, his essence, his stand in the world, what he applied himself to, namely the pursuit of acts of kindness and his whole identification with emulating God in kindness, but his incredible iconoclastic, is that the word? Iconoclastic personality of standing up against the tide of conformity, which at that time was the most rank idolatry. And it cost him, it was going to cost him his life had not God stepped in. And he was so against conformity. And
he was very much like God in that way, because we learn from parashat Noach that God was against conformity when the people of the world got together and said, let's make one nation, one language, one way of thinking.
Funny that you say that you chose those particular words. How prophetic of you, because unless this is what you're referring to, but your words bring to mind the exceptional verse in Ezekiel that says Abraham was one. And the prophet applies this terminology to Abraham in the name of Hashem, comparing him essentially to God himself, that Echad Haya Avraham, that was his very nature. He was like God, and that he stood for the same thing. He was absolutely one. And so the conformity in his day, the political correctness was this Nimrodian subservience to all
bow down to
idolatry.
idols.
And, I'm fond of this idea that we've mentioned in the past, the idea that, we are introduced to Avraham at the end of Parshat Noach. His genealogy is briefly traced there. And we know, between the lines, the tradition about what it means that Avraham left Ur Kasdim, the fire of the Chaldees, and the whole account of how Nimrod threw Abraham into the fiery furnace, and the whole deal with his family, who Terach was, his father, who was actually an idol salesman, and his brother, who was killed. And they left, and then all of a sudden we have parashat Lech Lecha beginning in verse 1, chapter 12, where Hashem said to Abram, this was his name at that time, Avram, go for yourself from your land, from your relatives, and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. And as far as we can see, at least in the lines, not in between the lines, this is the first conversation that they've had. This is the first time that Hashem ever revealed himself to Avram, the patriarch, which in itself is a whole incredible concept, why Hashem popped out of the woodwork and actually revealed himself to this one man after 20 generations, basically 10 generations from Adam to Noah, 10 generations from Noah to Avraham, and now all of a sudden, in the midst of the turmoil, Hashem actually revealed himself to one person, and the reason for that is because, and we learn, that he was so totally consumed, totally taken up with, totally sincerely burning with the desire to know Hashem, to know God, that God actually revealed himself to him. So, but why now is my point. This idea that I think is so compelling, the idea that when, Noah's genealogy is briefly traced at the end of, Avram's genealogy is briefly traced at the end of parashat Noach, and now all of a sudden out of nowhere, go for yourself. And the real reason, I'm culling thousands of pages of commentaries and standing on one foot and just putting it to you straight and directly, the most beautiful reason what's going on here is that after all the disappointments from the time of Garden of Eden, through the time of the flood, and the dispersion, and the Tower of Babel, and everything that was going on, that it just wasn't cohesive, it wasn't taking, it wasn't gelling, it wasn't, the backsliding and the lack of responsibility taking in the family of man was appalling. And basically God was like saying, who will change this? Who will guarantee that my name will not be forgotten? Who will guarantee that the purpose for which I created humanity, namely to know who I am, will be safeguarded? He was looking for someone that would take the responsibility of being the guardian of Hashem's honor in the world and passing on that legacy, and that is Avraham. And that's why he suddenly appears now. And the beautiful thing here is, what is a Jew? And I'm going to go out now, and I'm going to be bold. Some of our listeners, they might think this is over the top, and I don't think it is. But what is a Jew? What is the whole identity all about? The main thing, because God didn't say to Avraham, you looking for me? Oh, you decided that I exist, and you discerned from the very fabric of creation and nature that there must be a God in the world, and here I am. Keep Shabbat. Keep Shabbat, or even study Torah, or put on tefillin, or any of the important mitzvot. He didn't do that. He didn't do any of those things, even though, by the way, the sages teach us that Abraham actually kept the entire Torah. He even kept the details of Shabbat. All this before he was even officially a Jew. He kept the whole Torah. He studied everything, and he knew intuitively through his own natural intuition. It's called through his kidneys. He knew what Torah was, and he learned with Shem and Aver, who preserved the tradition from Noah and from Adam. But God didn't tell him to do any of those things. Instead, God said to him, go to the land that I will show you. Like you said so beautifully, it's like the first mitzvah in the whole Torah that was given over to the people of Israel is Eretz Yisrael. And Avraham is so totally identified with and bound up inexorably with what the land of Israel is all about. And, Avraham is Hebron. He is Hebron. That's who he is. That's his whole nature. Hebron comes from the word Hebron, the city I'm referring to, of course, here, where we have the tomb of the patriarchs, which was his city. The root of that word is chaver, the friend. Avraham was the friend of God. And didn't King David reign in Hebron before he reigned in Jerusalem? He had to reign in Hebron. Hebron is the key to everything. Avraham is the key to everything. But the idea is, we live in the world now, right? It's the world of BDS, right? It's the world of constant battering the state of Israel in this ridiculously obscene, obsessive miscarriage of justice and prejudice against Israel. No matter what we do, it'll never be right. No matter what we say, it'll never be right, according to some people, right? And it's so horrific, right? It's so horrific. Just yesterday, the other day, that is, time is a blur to me. The other day, my friend Yitzchak Reuven shows me a certain site, right? It's a certain educational site about music, if you must know, okay? And the site helps you with chords for certain songs,
Lyrics.
okay? And the site was able to tell by our IP address that we're in Israel. So it said right there. Could you find that and read it to us? What it said there?
You have to give me. Keep talking, Rabbi.
It said like, you're in Israel, and I'm blocking you because of the incredible humanitarian crimes that you commit. And here he's got it. Here. Okay, Yitzchak's going to read it to us. This is the message that we receive when we go to this site.
Cultural boycott, access denied. As a
cultural boycott, access denied.
As a contribution to a cultural boycott of the State of Israel, a long overdue reaction to the absurd inhumanity that is demonstrated in its actions that go against everything that I and this site stand for. Access to the name of the site has been blocked for visitors from Israel. If you think you have been blocked incorrectly, drop me a note. I'll see what I can do.
Continue.
If you think that you've been blocked unfairly, that's not something I can do anything about. Just so that is mentioned, the boycott is not directed against individuals of Jewish descent or religion, but against the State of Israel and its actions. I feel sorry for those Israelis who have fallen victim to the aggression and violence in the area, no less and no more than I feel for the Palestinians in the same situation. I wonder if I could get onto this site if my IP address showed that I was in Abu Dis or Ramallah or something.
Right. But apparently, in my opinion, this person, with all due respect, has no idea what they're talking about, has no idea that there are Israeli Arabs that sit on the Supreme Court as judges of the State of Israel. It's so ridiculous, this tired claptrap about
arrogant ignorance,
about our humanitarian crimes and how we have to have this cultural boycott. It's just so unbelievable, and these are people that are driven by, and by the way, there's no question whatsoever in my mind, at least in this particular case, that is a Jewish person who wrote that too. But the thing is, it's this weird sense of what would you call it? It's like self-hatred, of self-criticism, of identifying everything that's bad in the world with Israel's struggle to survive. Why is that? How could the noblest cause in the world become a humanitarian crime to the Palestinians?
You're looking for me for an answer to that question?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd have to really think about that. I mean, it's easy to point the finger at us, I guess, because we're not bowing down to the idol of politically correct.
And therefore, we don't deserve to exist at all, because we
get thrown in the fiery furnace, like Avram.
Came home because we claim our land, because we're building up our land, because we are a light to the nations, because we are raising Jewish children in the Jewish homeland. We're a pariah. And you know, you look at their forefathers' lives, you look at the details of Avraham and everything that he went through, and all the adventures that are already going on in this Torah portion, with going down to Egypt, and with Sarah, and with the War of the Kings, and with the vision of the covenant between the portions, and God telling him about the exile, etc. And that's why I say he's so bound up with this land. And the first thing that God tells Abraham is to go to the land that I will show you. That's the definition of our very lives. He didn't, you know, Jewish people think that they can be Jews somewhere else. They think that they can, that their Jewish identity, that the word they use is religion, which is a word that I don't use. Their Judaism, which is a word that I don't use, can be measured by the mitzvah that they do and by their lifestyle. But according to what God is saying here, the very first thing is this land.
This land is taking a stand. It's making a statement, a commitment that Avraham made, and apparently that applies to all of us. Avraham, by the way, if you read carefully, he was a man of stature. He was an important person. He was a known person. He had what to lose, is what I mean to say. He wasn't some, migratory person who didn't have much anyway, and so God says, go here or go there, what does he care? And he wasn't a person who was involved or looking for some kind of, inner spiritual world that he could just, climb up to a mountaintop and disappear and live in a perfect existence. No, he was a man of the world, and he was a man of means, and he was a known entity, and so he was also a target, and he had what to lose, and he had what was at risk to lose, and he didn't let that stop him. He did what God told him to do, and dealt with all that.
So his claim to fame really was, and this is how his career was launched, was standing up for the one God.
Yeah.
And God is telling him, well, if that's the case, that you won't know who I am, then you have to go to this land. So that's what it means to be here. That's what it means to be standing up for the one God. And thus, my equation is, when I encounter these people who hype this thing like cultural boycott, like Israel has to, Israel's artists and Israel's poets and Israel's musicians have to be boycotted because of what we're doing to the Palestinians, right? First of all, these people don't know any history. They don't have any idea. They haven't ever studied or inquired as to what the connection of the people of Israel are to this land, as to what the Palestinian narrative is really all about, as to the lies that are perpetrated by the Palestinian propaganda disinformation machine, as to the whole lie of the Palestinian people, and the whole arrangement of this effort to destroy Israel through this so-called Palestinian cause. And so all these fine, well-intentioned people have bought this whole deal, hook, line, and sinker, and thus identify Israel with crimes against these people.
Crimes that many of these people they're accusing Israel of crimes that have been perpetrated by the nations that they live in, and are still being perpetrated by the nations that they live in against other peoples, and by the nations that they've come from against other peoples. There's a lot of projecting going on here. It's very easy to point your finger at Israel and accuse Israel of all sorts of crimes that are happening in your own backyard and you're part of, and even if you're not part of, you are living off the fat of the land because someone else already ethnically cleansed it.
But the point is, everybody else is allowed to do whatever they need to do, and everybody else is allowed to thrive. All Israel is trying to do is survive, and the greatest crime that Israel has committed is that not only is she surviving, but she is thriving, and she's a world leader of so many things, of technology, of science, of art, of medicine. And this is the biggest crime of all, because the world can't countenance the fact that despite its attempts to destroy us, we're still here.
It's a big problem.
So we look at Abraham, whose cardinal attribute is chesed, is kindness, as we are going to emphasize in next week's Torah portion. Abraham is pure, undistilled belief and the courage to stand up for God, and he is the desire to bestow acts of kindness upon others. That's what a real leader is all about. And it's also, the first thing I said when we started the show is like, why is so much attention given to the forefathers? Why is there so much of the book of Bereshit that's occupied with who they were and what they did? And you mentioned, as it were, the parallel between God and Abraham himself, and I mentioned the verse. One was Abraham. There's another teaching that our sages share with us. It's a kind of a mystical expression that the forefathers are themselves the chariot of the divine presence. And the idea of that expression, ha'avot hen ha'merkava, is, they were most absolutely human beings. That's all they were. We don't have any sort of transcendence in the Jewish tradition. You know, they lived as people, they died as people, but yet they are considered to have been on such a rarefied spiritual level. You know why? Because of their own spiritual work, because of their efforts to become as perfect as possible, as better as possible. That's what it means, that they are the chariot that holds the divine presence in this world. And so, you know, we talk about world leaders today and all the criticism that's being leveled against this one and that one. You know, and then you talk about people that get away with all sorts of horrible crimes, and I'm not going to sully myself by talking about all these people that have been in the news lately. You know exactly who I mean, and that's not who we look up to. That's not what our standard of measure is. Our standard of measure is exactly what we're learning about this week, Abraham, and that's why the Torah spends so much time on the lives of these men, because this is our benchmark. This is what we are striving for. We're striving for that relationship with God. We're striving for that walk.
This is our reality show.
Yes. Yes, it's like a reality show. We're striving for that level of dedication and self-sacrifice and courage that is demonstrated by Abraham. And you know what? The sages tell us that Abraham, he taught the entire world that there's only one God. It's all from him. It's all, every good understanding, everything that's good in the world comes from Abraham. He was a trailblazer. He was a pioneer. He was a crusader. He was the first person who made it his business to teach the world that there's only one God. He's the one who started the whole thing. And in turn, what did God tell him? To go to this land. That's the equation that will bring about redemption, salvation for the whole world.
I guess if it was just a career for him, he could have stayed in the Haran where he was living and said, well, I can do it from here. But going to the land of Israel was an expression of commitment and faith in God and in his way. Abraham's
one was Abraham,
Abraham
the patriarch, who is the star of this week's Torah portion, Lech Lecha. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Temple Talk.
Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven with Rabbi Richman here in Jerusalem, Israel, Temple Institute. Today is the 4th day of the month of Mar Cheshvan, 5778, October 24th, 2017. This coming Shabbat, we read parashat Lech Lecha, the third parsha of Sefer Bereshit, Genesis. Lech Lecha, go to yourself, go to the land of Israel, God's commandment, first commandment to Avraham. And
the center of the land of Israel,
and the center of the land of Israel
is Jerusalem.
Is Jerusalem, and
the center of Jerusalem is the Temple Mount.
Right, and of course, you're so jumping the gun, Rabbi, so jumping the gun. And of course, in another couple of weeks, God's going to say to Avraham again, Lech Lecha, Lech Lecha, Lech Lecha to Jerusalem, to the Temple Mount. But in the meantime, this coming Thursday, which is the 6th day of Mar Cheshvan, is actually I believe it's the 852nd anniversary of the Lech Lecha of Rambam, Maimonides, the greatest of sages of the nation of Israel throughout the millennia. Rambam, otherwise known as Maimonides, who left where he was living in Morocco, North Africa, and got on a boat and sailed to Akko, northern port in Israel. After a very harrowing and dangerous trip, storm arose and the ship was nearly capsized, but he made it, and soon after ventured southeastward from Akko toward Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem on the 6th day of Mar Cheshvan, this coming Thursday, he and his companions who he was traveling with ascended the Temple Mount and prayed on the Temple Mount in, as he called it, the great and holy house, meaning the Temple Mount, the place of the Holy Temple, and he wrote of his prayers there and of his great emotional impact that it had on him. He wrote a letter describing it and actually commanded his children and his children's children and all his offspring throughout the end of time to take this day and make of it a festive day and have a festive Sudat Mitzvah on this day to express his thanks and joy at being able to do this.
So all this we actually know from a letter which Maimonides wrote describing his pilgrimage to the Temple Mount, and by the way, afterwards he continued his journey in the land, and he went to Hebron, and he also prayed in the tomb of the patriarchs, speaking of Abraham and Hebron and the tomb of the patriarchs. But he wrote in a way that he expressed himself in a way which was very emotion-laden, considering Maimonides is usually not so in his writing, and he was really overcome by the privilege to be able to pray on the Temple Mount. As you say, he actually left instructions for his descendants for all time that they should mark the day with personal rejoicing and a festive meal, which is a concept in Jewish law, that when one has a miracle performed for them or some special occasion, they should declare that day as a personal Yom Tov, as a personal festival. And what you left out so far from your narrative was that in that letter that Maimonides writes, he mentions that this trip that he took in the land of Israel to come to the Temple Mount was fraught with danger. It was actually tachat sakana. It was under personal peril. And what was the peril at that time was that, if I'm not mistaken, historically, that the Crusaders were the sovereign power in the land of Israel, and they didn't look sympathetically upon Jewish wayfarers. In fact, I think they would tend to kill them in the open thoroughfares if they found them. It was a time when there weren't a lot of Jews here in the land of Israel, and the Rambam faced that peril, that possibility, and it was that important to him to come to Jerusalem to pray at the Temple Mount. And this is really the stuff that dreams are made of. I got to tell you, this is so moving even to recount this story. And by the way, if anyone is interested in reading more of the details or refreshing themselves the details that we're discussing here about Maimonides' famed trip to the Temple Mount and seeing some more information about him and the exact wording of his letter, this can all be found at templeinstitute.org. under the pull-down menu bar, Maimonides, under Temple Mount, Maimonides.
Under Temple Mount.
Correct?
Maimonides.
Or Maimonides visit.
Under Temple Mount. You know what? I'll let you know.
So the idea is that in our time, with the increased numbers of Jewish worshippers that are visiting the Temple Mount, and with the change in attitude that we are witness to, and that we have played such a role in over the past few years, this day, the 6th of Cheshvan, of Mar Cheshvan, which is this Thursday, has become a day of pilgrimage for many, many hundreds, and who knows, possibly thousands of Jews who will be making their way to the Temple Mount to trace Maimonides' footsteps and to celebrate his ascent. And it's become culturally here in Israel an important day of meaning and of significance. And it wasn't just a number of years ago, but it is now, because of the tremendous awakening and motivation of so many good Jews to visit the Temple Mount.
Another very beautiful aspect of this story is simply that Maimonides himself, in his magnum opus, the Mishnah Torah, in book of divine service, Sefer Avodah, in the section called Hilchot Beit HaBechira, the laws of the chosen house, chapter 7, describes the actual commandment of Marat Mikdash, showing reverence to God in the place of the Holy Temple, and how one is commanded to do this even in times when there is no Holy Temple, because it's been destroyed. And he describes precisely how to do this, which is what we base our ascents to the Temple Mount on. And obviously he himself not only recorded these laws, culled them, of course, from earlier sources,
but lived
when
them. He preached.
He
Exactly.
lived them. He did it, which is just fascinating. It's very, very beautiful.
And all this is so
inspiring.
important because, honestly, people talk about the rebuilding of the temple. Devout Jews talk about the rebuilding of the temple and how they're looking forward to it and how they want it to happen. But the first step that has to be taken in order to bring us to any sort of possibility of building the temple, the first step is to go to the Temple Mount.
First step is Lech Lecha.
Exactly.
It's always the first step. Go there, be in that place.
To go there and to with your own body stem the tide of inertia, of destruction, of apathy, of enemy occupation, to go there and be seen there by God in the place that He wants to see us, the place of the Holy Temple.
It's very beautiful.
And how meaningful also the fact that we're having this conversation now, and that the Rambam's ascent took place in the month of Mar Cheshvan, considering the fact that we have this rather unusual tradition that the month of Mar Cheshvan, which is so devoid of any observances or holidays, is actually going to be the time of the dedication of the third temple in the future. We've talked about that. And how is that ever going to happen? It's going to happen when the Jewish people picks themselves up and streams to the Temple Mount.
It's very beautiful. We mentioned last week, the parashat Noach always is read at the beginning of the month of Mar Cheshvan, which was the month actually where the flood began and ended 1 year later, or when he reemerged from the ark 1 year later. And it's the beginning of the rainy season. And of course, this week is Lech Lecha, and it seems to always coincide with the Rambam's ascent, his arrival in the land of Israel, and ascent to the Temple Mount and Hebron. And also the following day, the 7th of Cheshvan, which is this Thursday night, is also connected to the land of Israel, because it is
and
the day
also
that
connected to the Holy Temple.
To the Holy Temple, because it is the day that we begin to pray, to request, not just mention, but request rain here in the land of Israel in our
So
daily
we started
prayer.
mentioning it actually with the words Mashiv Haruach HaMorid HaGoshen, which means He causes the wind to blow and the rain to fall. That's just a statement, as like a praise of Hashem. We started mentioning that from Shmini Atzeret, because that's the day that we have the special communal prayer for rain. But the time that we actually begin our personal request, each of us, in the daily prayer for rain, when we actually say, V'tein tal umatar lebracha, please grant us dew and rain for blessing, we begin that on the 7th day of Mar Cheshvan, which is, Yitzchak mentioned, is Thursday night and Friday of this week. And the reason for that is also extremely beautiful, because it is a date that is calculated by the Holy Temple. And our recitation of that prayer, beginning on the 7th day of Cheshvan, is like an affirmation of the fact that our lives are totally around the Holy Temple, as if it would be standing right now, that everything that we do is dominated by, is influenced by the Holy Temple, because quite simply, the Jewish people came from all over the world to make the festive pilgrimage to the Holy Temple. The Aliyah L'Regel, they came by foot, they came by caravan, they can come by plane now. They came to visit Jerusalem for the festival of Sukkot. And the calculation that our sages made is that the time that it would be required for the furthest flung Jew who lives outside the land to be home, to return home safely after the pilgrimage to Jerusalem for Sukkot, is 2 weeks. And the 7th day of Cheshvan is exactly 2 weeks after Shmini Atzeret. And so the reason that we refrain from saying the prayer for rain for the first 2 weeks after Sukkot is because I guess we're so convinced that our prayer will be successful that we don't want any unfortunate pilgrim to be out in the open thoroughfare where they might get totally caught in a downpour from our prayers, and therefore we wait until they're all home, which is going to be happening this Thursday night, Friday. So that is an example of Holy Temple consciousness, which is actually reflected in the structure of Jewish law and our yearly practice in the liturgy here in the land of Israel. So right here, this week, in the month of Bar Cheshvan, we have 2 Holy Temple dates back to back. The 6th of Cheshvan, which is the date of the great Maimonides' ascent to the Temple Mount, and the 7th of Bar Cheshvan, which is the date of the beginning of our request for rain.
And conversely, at the end of the rainy season, which ends with the advent of Pesach, Passover, we change our prayer from rain to dew on the first day of Passover, without any chashash, any feeling of caution, because we're not praying for rain anymore. So we don't mind. It's no problem that the pilgrims are in Jerusalem, and they'll be in Jerusalem for the next week, and then 2 weeks later on the road. So in that case, we enact the prayer immediately with the advent of Passover. Don't have to wait 2 weeks in order to pray.
Holy Temple consciousness is what we're all about. And, again, it was only a few years ago that the audience for these ideas was very small, and that this was felt to be such an uphill battle. But there has been such a change in the fabric of society in the state of Israel, at least, due to these efforts, that, thank God, there is a completely different a configuration of a generation that is really growing up around the call to rebuild the Holy Temple.
Which, of course, creates debate and discussion, and
that's fine.
And that's fine, but it is back front and center, part of the national dialogue. Like we've been saying, it's in the news, it's in the media, it's in entertainment, it's in the synagogues, it's on the street, it's all over, it's everywhere.
And soon, it's going to be in West Texas as well.
West Texas, Rabbi, what you talking about?
Well, West Texas is a fine place. We have a lot of wonderful friends there, and there's a lot of very special people that want to learn about the Holy Temple. So very soon, in fact, next week, I think we're going to have Temple Talk, and then we're going to have a break for a couple of weeks because we're both going to be in the States. And I'm talking about the West Texas Holy Temple Conference, which is going to take place from the 9th to the 12th of November.
In Lubbock, Texas.
In Lubbock, Texas. And I think we have quite a number of people that are registered that we're looking forward to seeing and sharing with. And a good time will be had by all. It will be a group of sincere Torah students that will be all united in our common desire to learn, to grow, and to understand, and to participate in the rebuilding of the Holy Temple.
What more do we have to say, Rabbi, about parashat Lech Lecha, about Avraham, who burst into the scene this week and arrives in the land of Israel, and almost immediately has to travel down to Egypt because of a famine in the land. And again...
So the first thing God tells him is to go to this land, and the very first thing that happens is that he has a test already.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that happens is he arrives in Alon Moreh, which is near the city of Shechem, a beautiful Jewish town today, and he builds a mizbeach, he builds an altar to Hashem, and then continues on his journey. Actually, he entered the land in the north and traveled north to south, really along the mountain ridge, which defines the land of Israel, and into Hebron, Beersheba, and then of course had to travel down to Egypt. And all these tests that he was put through are, of course, they presage, I guess, tests that the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, have been made to measure up to many times over the generations. This is known as the Maaseh Avot.
Siman Lebanim. What transpired to the forefathers is a harbinger, as a sign of what will happen to the children.
Which also answers your question earlier. Why do we study at such great length and such detail the daily lives, the actions, the adventures of the Avot, of the forefathers? And that's because we learn from their experience how to conduct ourselves and how to measure up to the tests that we also are put through. And as we were talking about the tests that our generation has to measure up to, the lies, the accusations, the no holds bars,
attacks, the injustice, the prejudice
to wrest us from our land here. Yes, Avraham also had to deal with these things, as did Yitzchak and as did Yaakov in their day, and I guess that's just part of the package. Our metal is being tested constantly, and the anvil upon which our metal is forged is faith in Hashem. That's the whole story, and that's really the Yerusha. That's the inheritance that we get from Avraham, who did not hesitate. He was known, especially for rising up early in the morning to do God's will, because more than once it said that he was Vayashkem Baboker. He got up first thing in the morning when God told him to do something and ran out to do it without hesitation. And again, Siman Lebanim, that's an example of how we need to conduct our lives. Put God's will first, and conduct ourselves in that spirit.
And again, the amazing thing about Abraham was that he had nobody to teach him, but it was his own tremendous desire for truth that was his teacher. And it was so overcoming, and it was so powerful that God himself revealed himself to Abraham and every secret of creation.
It was like a reunion, I imagine, between man and God after all these generations.
This is the thing, is that this is exactly what the Midrash describes. God's reaction is that God is like, now I have a friend. Like somebody's finally calling out to me. Somebody's finally looking for me.
You talking to me?
After all these years, someone is finally looking to know who is running the world.
Yeah. How rewarding must that be? And yep, that's what we've been doing ever since.
Look at these amazing statements in the parashat Rabbi. Says that Avraham taught the whole world how to do tshuva, and then it says that he caused the name of the Holy One to be in the mouth of every single creature. It's amazing what this man was really all about, and how he stands for the true mission of what the Jewish people are all about. Do we always succeed in that? Do we get sidetracked? Are there bumps along the way? Yeah, there might be. But again, this is what we look to for leadership. This is what we look to as a role model, not anyone else or anything else. But this is what we're striving for. We're striving for that kind of pure relationship with Hashem and that kind of calling.
And that's what we're striving today for as a nation, and that is the huge challenge, to be a modern nation state, yet have at our center, our raison d'etre, our reason to be, our calling as a nation is to share this knowledge and shine this light with all the nations. That's the purpose of the state of Israel. The modern state, no less than the ancient nation.
And again, that's why there's so much opposition, and that's why there's so much unjust persecution of the state of Israel, because that's exactly what Israel is trying to do in the world.
Some people want to draw the shades and shut the light and compel mankind to live in darkness. And they will do their darndest to frustrate us in our efforts to reveal, as Avraham did, to reveal the truth and knowledge of God in our world, and as a partner to man, and as a friend to man, a relationship with man. That is really the mission, the purpose of the Jewish people, the purpose of the modern state of Israel. So, here's the music. Thank you, everybody, for being with us once again this week. Parashat Lech Lecha this coming Thursday. Anniversary of the Rambam's Ascent to the Temple Mount this coming Thursday night, Friday. We begin the prayer for rain, which we will continue throughout the rainy season. And next week, we'll be back with Temple Talk. Thanks for being with us this week. Temple Talk.